Welcome to We Are Valley, a podcast by Valley Medical Center, located in Renton, Washington. We Are Valley is dedicated to providing you bite-sized advice to improve your health and well-being, and keep you updated on the latest medical guidance. This podcast is for informational purposes only and is not intended to be taken as medical advice. So please talk to your provider before making changes that will affect your health.
Hello and welcome back to the We Are Valley podcast. I'm Kristen Bidwell. In today's episode, we're continuing a conversation about digital overload, a topic that had me and my guests talking so much that we could not contain the discussion to just one episode. In our last episode, we took a close look at the challenges impacting all of us around moderating our screen time, the effects of constant stimulation on our mental health, our focus and concentration, our relationships, and our sense of connection. We also explored ways technology can be both helpful and harmful, depending on how we use it and how it affects us individually. And today we want to continue that conversation by focusing on what we can do to reset. And we'll be sharing some practical strategies to diminish digital overload and create healthier boundaries with technology and support our well-being in a world that is always asking for our attention. So to help us move that conversation forward, I'm thrilled to again be joined by two mental health practitioners from Valley's Psychiatry and Counseling Clinic, Catherine Murray, a licensed independent clinical social worker, and Dr. Rebecca Strong, a board-certified psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner. Thank you for joining me again, you two.
Thanks for having us back, Kristen.
So to start with, we covered so much last time. And as I mentioned, there's a lot of challenges, but there are a lot of ways we can use tech for good. When you're talking to your patients, what are the ways that you suggest to give the brain a real break? And what do you advise them when they come to you with some of the issues we've been talking about?
One of the places I often start with people is thinking about what might be the deeper issue. So I like to think about what are our thoughts and beliefs around what's leading us to being on our screen. So something I see a lot is, we talked about this a bit in part one, but like the constant pressure to achieve, because our devices can create that false promise about, like, if I'm just on here, I can be productive. So I think doing some work to unlearn that and kind of scrutinizing those beliefs about what is my device actually offering to me? What do I actually believe about like rest, productivity, achievement? Because the reality is, no matter what I have actually accomplished today, I deserve rest, I deserve leisure, and I deserve relaxation.
Yeah, that's exactly where my brain was going as well. I was thinking about, some of the tenets with cognitive behavioral therapy, looking at what is leading me to the place that I'm in right now. And like you said, Catherine, what are we getting from our media consumption in that moment? A lot of us want the escapism, and that might increase during periods of stress. Often, I think people like to escape their day-to-day stress, escape their home life stress, work life stress, and that really is influenced in part by our beliefs around rest. I think sometimes we can be on our screens thinking that we're resting and being productive, almost like multitasking. Rest isn't productive in itself. So absolutely, I think our beliefs around what rest is, what it looks like, and our relationship with that, and what we feel we deserve makes a big difference. But I think examining what the media consumption is doing for us and what's bringing us there can be really helpful. And then you can start looking at, are there other ways I can get those needs met outside of media?
That's exactly right. It's what need is the device meeting? How else can I meet that need? So there are lots of ways to get rest. There are lots of ways to get stimulation. There are lots of ways to escape that don't require a device. And that's going to be unique to every person. But I do often advise my patients, if you're wanting rest, like your device probably isn't it. Maybe if you use that like for your screen time, like your TV time, maybe in small doses. But so think about what actually feels relaxing, what actually feels restful. Is it going for a walk? Is it laying down? Is it reading a book? That can also be escapism. That can also be stimulation. I heard a great piece of advice from a friend who said, anytime I got that urge to reach for my phone and open social media, she texts a friend instead. And that's a great example of a replacement behavior where you want that little like hit where, you get on social media, you get to see a pretty picture or an interesting person, but there's also a sense of like seeking connection there. And instead, she texts a friend, gets that connection, and still gets that little like hit of being on your phone.
Yeah, I love that. I think last time we talked about kind of the metaphor with food and nutrition compared to screen time. And, in both cases, we talk about consumption. And I think that what I'm hearing from both of you is maybe paying attention to the way certain types of screen time or technology make you feel the way you would if you're trying to adjust your diet. I'm like, hey, I can have a cookie and that's going to help me find this comfort, but I'm not going to feel horrible because I've overconsumed later. It seems like that would be a good one to keep in mind of like how your tech is making you feel.
Yes.
If someone's feeling overwhelmed and they know that they've done some of this work that you're suggesting and they know they don't feel great on certain types of technology with certain amounts of screen time, but it's just too hard, even in some cases, maybe logistically impossible to quit screen time based on their home life or their work life. What would you advise as a healthy starting point? Are there small changes that make a difference for how people feel?
I think it's good to start with the mindfulness of like, how am I feeling with the current use that I have, and how do I wish I felt, and then how to reconcile the two. Your question included the possibility that it might be impossible to separate from screen time. And I would love to have a conversation with that person about how impossible is it really? And I think a lot of times the strategies that I recommend is to try to go old school. People have been people for a very long time without screens. I mean, I love my screen, but I have found a lot of success in going old school. When I hear people say that, oh, well, I can't have my phone anywhere other than my nightstand because it's my alarm clock. And I'm like, what if, bear with me, but what if you got this crazy thing called an alarm clock that's made just for that? So that's what I mean. I'm not really that snarky, but to bring some humor to it. I mean, there are a lot of things that our devices make more efficient and more convenient, and it's wonderful. But if we're really trying to detox or at least create a little bit more balance in our life with regard to our screen time use, really going old school in whatever way that is, get an old school like grocery list, notepad, finding ways to get your needs met without the screen.
If it's too hard for you to just not always have your phone in your hand, or you say, well, I can't do a notepad, I can't read my own handwriting.
Right.
Start with the things on your device that cause you the most distress. Painting with a broad brush, I would say for many people, that's probably news and social media. That doesn't mean you can't ever access those things, but back to the food analogy, those would probably be the dessert type things where maybe moderation is better. Can you create some barriers where it just makes it a little harder for you to access those things? Can you delete those apps on your phone? You have to go to the website now, or you have to re-download the app every time you want to use it. It seems like more phones allow you to do screen time limits. I also heard about this new device, and I think there's probably many that are like it, called a brick, where there is a physical device that you place somewhere in your house and you scan your phone on it, and apps that you have decided beforehand will stop working. And then if you want to access those apps again, you have to physically get up, go to that device, and tap your phone again. So again, the idea is like you're creating barriers. You're just making it a little bit harder. Everything on our device, everything on our phone is so easy to access all of the time, where I just put my thumb and there it is.
I really like the idea of creating that barrier. I was also going to bring up the brick as a resource. Another way to do it without having to buy a device would be to create a designated spot for your phone. That little barrier of having to get up and go to that other room where your phone is might be just enough time to pause and remind yourself, oh, wait, I put this over there for a reason. I'm really trying to not engage as often with the screen time, finding ways to make it a little bit less convenient is a great strategy.
Absolutely. I love how the world of tech is stepping in to save us from our tech. I want to revisit the idea, Rebecca, you mentioned digital detox. My family has started screen-free Saturdays, and I find it interesting when I tell people this. We've done it for a few months now. Their faces kind of drop and they're like, how? How can you give up screens for a whole day? And my husband does it, my elementary schooler does it. We don't watch TV and we try to avoid our phones as best we can. Sometimes there's a little GPS action or little things like that, but we're not on social. We're putting our phones down, to your point, somewhere where they're not in front of us. This sounds like a lot maybe to some people, and it's not the baby steps that we first started talking about, but I personally have found a lot of value in almost like a cold turkey approach where you really are resetting for a period of time. I just wanted to get feedback from the two of you on how you can approach detox in this way, and is there value in a really solid chunk of time where you're off of tech almost completely?
I would think that for the sake of your brain really creating, right, like a new habit, a new neural pathway around, I don't always have to reach for my phone for that thing. And I actually get to experience pleasure from reading a physical book, or I get to tolerate not knowing the answer to that question and I'm not going to immediately reach for my phone for the answer. That's where something like a detox, a longer period of time, can be really, really beneficial. It does mean there's a certain amount of, I don't love this word, but I'm going to use it, like a certain amount of discipline or tolerance that might be required that you would have to be willing to sign on for. And for people who might not feel ready for that, something that's more of a step down approach, right? So we don't want to say either or. I think both have immense value, perhaps in different ways for our brains.
I think it also kind of goes back to how technology serves us and which aspects we don't like from it. If it's just like a general wanting to spend less time with screens, doing a once a week approach might meet that goal. But if there's like a daily screen time use that's creating a daily outcome that we don't like, then perhaps something on a daily basis would be needed. I think it depends on what your goals are, what your needs are, and also what your readiness is. Because absolutely, if you aren't ready to sign up for cold turkey, if you will, then it's just opening up the possibility for shame. And then now we just feel bad about our use and we feel bad about letting ourselves down. And I also feel like we have to be careful not to create a sense of illicitness around it, because often that actually makes the pull stronger. I know for myself that if I am, say, avoiding sugar, suddenly I want sugar, it seems, way more than on a normal day. And if I focus on what I can't have, it makes it harder. So sometimes I need to frame it in a, like, I am choosing blah, 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 rather than I cannot blah, blah, blah. In my home, we don't do screen time after school. And that's purely because on a daily basis, it was disturbing sleep. And so we were looking at what the problem was, the frequency, and we used that information to come up with our intervention.
Yeah, great problem solving of identifying where the issues were and what worked. On the topic of boundaries too, and talking about using tech for good in terms of these goals, we talked about taking the apps off your phone that don't serve you. What about notification management? I know last time we talked a lot about attention and executive functioning, and even in the workplace, sometimes it's hard to stay focused on one task at a time with emails and Teams and text. Can I find ways to live my life where I have technology in front of me and part of it, but I'm utilizing it in a way that feels a little bit less disjointed?
Yeah, I like the concept of having admin time, or using the term like batching, right? Where it's like, I will do all of my emails now, or I will do all of my Teams messages now. Depending on the type of work you do, this may or may not work. I think a helpful step is getting some clarity on what are the expectations in your workplace, and then do those expectations fit with my abilities? And if they don't, that's where boundaries may be helpful. email. Those types of boundaries typically need to be clear and communicated versus I'm just going to do this and not tell anyone. That can get you in trouble in your workplace. You might want to think about the why. Why are you doing it? So you can express that. And then how are you going to continue to communicate clearly if I'm not going to answer emails after 5 p.m., but the expectation is I'm available until 8 p.m.? Well, how am I going to be available for communication? And so being able to do some problem solving around that. And that may not be a reasonable boundary in that situation. Admin time or batching can look like this is my email time, and then maybe I have another email time. So if I hear that ding or I see that notification, I have to give myself permission to ignore it because I know I'm going to get to it later.
That's really tricky for my patient population. The patients that I mostly serve are those with ADHD, basically adults with ADHD. And that impulsivity component is really hard. I think it's hard even for neurotypical people to resist the impulsivity to take a look at whatever that ding was, whatever that little badge you see show up on the corner. What is that? If you are someone who struggles with impulsivity in that way, then I do recommend turning off notifications, whether that's the visual badge, whether that's the sound, or both. Sometimes it's very necessary. I do not use an Android phone, so I'm not sure of the functionality, but I know that the iPhone has the ability to set do not disturb times, and you can actually make it very customized as well with specific days of the week, certain times. You can specify if there are certain apps or people that can get through that do not disturb barrier, because that's another thing people have concerns with when I bring this option up is like, well, what if something horrible happens at my kid's school and I need to be reached? You can actually adjust the settings for that if you take the time to figure out how to do it. And it makes it a little bit easier to then make peace with this do not disturb time.
Can you go into a little bit more just on how we can train our attention spans in general, in the world of short form videos and competing notifications? What are strategies specific to being able to sit on a task or be bored, as we talked about, for a period of time?
I think it's a combination of some of the things we've already addressed. The idea that Catherine mentioned of batching, or I'll call it time blocking, can be helpful so that if you have a set time for, let's say, daily news intake, and it's outside of that time, that parameter can sometimes help remind us of what our goal is. And therefore, it's easier to resist whatever that initial impulse might be. But again, it takes a degree of buy-in from ourselves. Like I joke with my patients that you have to honor the game. It's a game with yourself. No one's going to monitor you. And I mean, if you're an adult generally. And so if you decide to honor this game, then it can help to have those set times for various activities that you're trying to limit.
I also find, right, attention typically means like our nervous system is engaged in just the right way. And that if you have ADHD, that you are going to particularly struggle with this, and that no amount of training will necessarily fix that, right? Certain medications might help, and that neurotypical people will probably notice ups and downs with this throughout their day, but people with ADHD will notice a lot more ups and downs and probably peaks and valleys as opposed to small hills and dips. And so some of the things I talk to people about is paying attention to activation, right? Which is how sort of like turned on your nervous system is. And if you're really struggling to focus, you might need more or less nervous system activation. I find you often need more activation to be able to pay attention because the task you're trying to do is boring. It's not grabbing your attention in the way you need it to. There are things that you can do to activate your nervous system that aren't taking your cognitive attention away, but are like turning on your nervous system. So an example is like sitting on a yoga ball and you can kind of bounce on it or move around. I think listening to music, especially just like instrumental music. I also think sometimes like making yourself just a little bit physically uncomfortable. So I'm not advocating for like torture here, but maybe one thing I do a lot is I will not take my shoes off until I'm done working. And
Mm.
it's just sort of like a note to my brain, like, you're not in relaxation mode right now, pay attention.
That's a perfect example of honoring the game.
Mhm.
Like whatever game might work for you, if you can do it, like it makes you more successful, then that's great. And often it can be things that might seem a little bit, silly on the outside, like not taking your shoes off. If that works, then great. So it sort of speaks to mindfulness and cluing into how we're feeling with our engagement with any activity, but in this topic, technology. So some people, they need more activating input. So sitting on the yoga ball, listening to music. Some people actually need less. They can actually be hyper aware of everything going on around them. So there are different strategies like listening to noise muffling or noise canceling headphones and strategies like that.
Yeah, I think mindfulness is a really foundational piece of this conversation. In some ways, I almost feel like screen time technology can be a bit numbing and it makes us not think about those things. And then we need to kind of get more in touch with ourselves.
And that can be very uncomfortable for some people. I think there's a reason that our screen time is so popular. Deciding to focus more on mindfulness is no easy task for many of us. The one thing I will say about mindfulness that I hear a lot from patients is a sense that they can't do it. Often people want to start with something like meditation when they think about trying to be more mindful. And we think of meditation as this destination that you're going to end up in magically. And really, meditation is the act of struggling through it and doing your best and bringing yourself back into focus and acknowledging the distraction along the way. And honestly, those are similar techniques that you could use if you are trying to disengage a little bit from screen time use. Acknowledge the distraction. Oh, there's a notification. Okay, it's there, but I don't need to go check it out. I'm coming back into focus on what I'm doing right now. And you are sometimes going to go check that notification, and it's okay. And I think a really important part is realizing that that's part of the process and to not be black and white, like, oh, I looked at my notifications. This is a stupid experiment, which can be very tempting with any lifestyle change that we're trying to do.
I love that. I think meditation could be a really valuable piece here, and just mindfulness in general, and reminding yourself that that's kind of life. Something pulls you away and you got to keep getting back on track over and over again. And I think with practice, we can do hard things even with our screen time, with our tech use. We talked last time a bit with anxiety and depression and other areas of mental health in that arena, particularly doom scrolling, social media use, and that impact. I would love to hear from you. For those who suffer from anxiety and depression in particular, similar diagnoses, what are some strategies for preventing that doom scrolling feeling and going down that hole that does not seem to help people with those issues?
Going back to this kind of the very first thing we talked about with like, what is the underlying cause? What is the real reason? I find, especially with anxiety and doom scrolling, there's this connection between I'm really worried and I have to make a plan, or I have to know everything that's going on so I can be aware. In anxiety treatment, that's something that's called a safety behavior. But the loop it creates is I only know I'm safe if I've done my checks, and it actually over time increases our anxiety because we keep reinforcing that something must be wrong and I have to check. And a lot of times, if we're doom scrolling, we're looking at things like scary news stories. So then we feel like, well, I actually must not be safe. I'm next, whatever the bad story is. And so anxiety gets higher and higher, and then we have to scroll more and more. And so the way to get out of that loop is very challenging, which is to stop doom scrolling. So sometimes it might be, okay, you get to be on your phone, but it's not whatever you've been scrolling. Or clearly you're getting some benefit by distracting your mind, but let's not read the news or let's not look at whatever you've been looking at because you're caught in this loop now. Yes, I know you're getting relief and you're able to sleep, but long term it's making things much worse for you. So I like to start from that education piece. And sometimes people say, no, I like my doom scrolling, and they're going to keep at it. And if that's your choice, that's fine. I do think, again, long term, there's probably really a cost to it. And there's probably other strategies that are going to help you, especially in the nighttime, sort of like power down and have better sleep long term. But that would be where I would start.
I also have this conversation with patients a lot. I think it's such a universal thing, especially as we can feel more and more threatened in our day to day. But I encourage people again to kind of think like, what am I getting out of it? So in the case of anxiety, yes, there's that short-term sense of like, oh, well, now I know, so things are better. I often will encourage people to think, how is engaging with this changing me or my behavior or my life? Am I feeling more anxious over time? Am I feeling inspired to get involved in community and make a change? If that's what it is, then maybe it's not as terrible. I'm not sure. But I do think that for those who don't want to give up their doom scrolling, it can be helpful to sort of limit the sources of information a bit, especially when things become an echo chamber, with the algorithms set up the way that they are, and to perhaps choose a few sources that you consider reliable. If you can limit your sources of information and limit who you give your attention to and making sure that there's a sense of purpose coming out of it, that can sometimes be more helpful rather than just scaring yourself repeatedly before bed.
And you mentioned before bed, and you talked about the alarm clock previously. I think we would be remiss to not talk about the detrimental effects on our sleep that screen time can have. And I'm curious what you recommend to your patients who might be struggling in this arena.
Yeah, I think there's a couple parts to it, right? Good sleep hygiene is no screen time, at least an hour before bed. I would say ideally around 2 hours before bed. Some of that is blue light can impact your brain's ability to fall asleep. A lot of devices now have the night version where it's like a dimmer or more yellow light. But I think even with that, devices are just so stimulating now that it's probably not giving you the type of content that's like calming. So, like to Rebecca's point, it's like, how is this making you feel? Is this driving you to action? Is it making you feel more scared? Is it creating a sense of soothing and relaxation? And so I acknowledge many people need a lot of assistance to kind of soothe their mind. And it may also be the only time of day where you're getting like time to yourself for leisure time. And so how do you get to honor that without engaging in something that is going to create fear, create overstimulation? And so it goes back to that mindfulness, internal awareness. What are you consuming? So maybe save the end of the world TV show for daytime. But if it's after 9 p.m., maybe it's cute or meditation or ocean sounds only. And so it's not to say none at all, but just being really thoughtful about what you're consuming.
I always think of different strategies, like just very pragmatic strategies that I work on with my patients for how to make that goal possible. Because I absolutely encourage my patients to avoid screen time, ideally 2 hours before bed, just like Catherine was saying. An hour, if we can even get that much, that's exciting. But some of the little strategies that I encourage are keep the phone on the other side of the room, even if you are using that as your alarm clock, or keep it out of the bedroom. Do get that old school alarm clock.
Yeah, I like the idea too, in all of these elements that we're talking about, of what will you do instead? And we mentioned the meditation, for example, or music. And when we launched our Screen-Free Saturdays, my family and I, we actually sat down and made a list of things we can do off screens. And it's just like, hey, I found that I enjoy paint by numbers, or we can take a walk. Our dogs have been getting more exercise, so they love it, and things like that, where it's simple, but sometimes when the phone is just in your hand, it's hard to think on the spot of what you can do instead. bed, whether it's at bedtime or in the middle of the weekend.
I love that strategy. I use that strategy with my clients a lot. I encourage them to come up with sort of a boredom list, boredom busting list, if you want to make it
Yeah.
extra cute. And that helps with that question that came up in the first episode about boredom tolerance. And a lot of us don't know what to do, or we've forgotten what to do. What do I like to do other than scroll on my phone, right? And so it can be kind of a nice opportunity to explore new things that you've only considered doing, or to go back to things that you forgot how much you enjoy. But I love the idea of having a list that you can go to when you're feeling bored or you're feeling the urge to use screen time and you're in the process of disengaging from screens. Because in the moment, the urge to use our screen is going to be much louder than coming up with these other ideas. But if you already have them written down and you can go to it, then that makes it far more likely that you're going to be successful.
Well, and the other benefit about, some of the things you're listing, like a paint by number, or I'm thinking about something like coloring or knitting. If you're doing an activity that requires some mental effort, but not a lot. I mean, if you're like me, knitting would require a lot of mental effort, but let's say you already know how to do it. That can put you in the same mental state as what we would want from mindfulness, right? Where you're paying attention, but it's not heavy mental effort. And if that's something that you can do as you're heading to bed, it's probably going to make you feel more relaxed, more aware of what is going to make you comfortable, what's going to make you ready to actually fall asleep. But it's not you're totally alone with your mind, like doing just like a pure meditation activity might do. So there's less of that sense of discomfort, like, oh, my thoughts, I don't want these, and more, I have an activity I can focus on, but my mind can still drift a little bit.
Yeah, I hear that Gen Z is even creating these analog bags. So they'll put knitting and an actual physical book or like a crossword puzzle. Those who are doing it will take it with themselves on the bus or wherever it may be. So it's kind of even the next step of preparing yourself for what you need.
Great.
One piece I wanted to touch on as we near the end of our time is we talked last time about connection. And I think that is a really important piece of how, when we're so digitally connected, sometimes we can feel emotionally disconnected. You did a great job going into that in the last conversation. But what are some strategies you recommend for those who feel that sense of disconnection and want to build on that in their real life?
I would say look at the people you already have around you. I think people can struggle with this question because there's a sense of having to just totally reinvent the wheel. Like, I don't have any friends. And I really like to use the word social connection, right? Like we did in the first episode, because you can find social connection many, many places. And it can be as simple as, when's the last time you left your home? What did you do? If you smiled at someone, what happened? How did that make you feel? If you talked to the person you're interacting with when you're completing a transaction, how did that make you feel? I know common suggestions are like sign up for an activity that you enjoy. And yes, people can do that. But for someone where it might feel new or overwhelming, or you have social anxiety, that can feel like a really monumental task. So I think starting really small with like, who do you already have around you? Who can you turn to? And notice the small moments of connection you already have and try to build on those.
Maybe you ask the barista how their day is going instead of staring at your phone when you're ordering your coffee. And then to circle back to mindfulness, it's, hey, that felt human. Like that felt like a real connection. And I think just like everything we've talked about, you can build upon it and continue to try to find those moments that feel right. As we near the end of our time, I wanted to give you each a chance for a last word. If people have taken this all in and they're ready to make some changes, but they don't know where to start, if you could recommend one digital habit change to begin, what would be your top recommendation?
I will sometimes challenge my patients to keep screens out of the bedroom. That's what a lot of sleep specialists would recommend for those with sleep disorders or challenges falling asleep. But I do think that if we can keep our phones out of our bedroom, that can help limit doom scrolling If we have a partner, it might encourage interaction with our partner rather than two people in the same room on two different devices. It doesn't work for everyone. Some people are used to having TV as a background noise for sleep. I understand that. But if someone is looking for something they can do that doesn't cost any money or any really big planning, it's just keep your phone out of your room.
I love that. That's great. I was thinking of something pretty closely related, which is that if you are fortunate enough to get to have like in-person, face-to-face time with someone you care about, make sure you're prioritizing at least some time with no devices, even if that just means your phone is there, but it's screen down. Similar to what Rebecca said, it's so easy to become two people next to each other on a device, not acknowledging or interacting. It feels more like face-to-face time is at a premium right now. And so if we can revel in that a little bit more, I think that's a benefit for everyone.
I love that. And great places to begin. Thank you both for this deeply enlightening conversation, both parts of it. So if you haven't listened to part one, time to go back and listen to part one. But I really appreciate your insight. I hope this is helpful for those who are listening. Catherine Murray and Dr. Rebecca Strong, thank you so much for joining us.
This has been We Are Valley, a podcast produced by Valley Medical Center in Renton, Washington, as a part of our mission to care for our community like family. If you liked this episode, be sure to subscribe to our feed for more great health content. And for more health resources or to find a provider, visit valleymed.org. Thank you for joining us.